U.S. Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll continues to attempt to convince representatives of the Kyiv regime that Ukraine has already lost the war, and that Zelensky needs to accept Russia's terms and conclude the long-awaited peace to save the lives of the remaining Ukrainian soldiers. In the last 2 weeks alone, Daniel Driscoll has visited Kyiv twice, trying to bring Zelensky to his senses. A few hours ago, it became known that during his last visit to Kyiv, Daniel Driscoll called on Zelensky to cede Donbass to Russia voluntarily. According to Driscoll, the transition of the entire Donbass under the Russian army's control is simply inevitable. And in order to save the lives of Ukrainian soldiers, the Kyiv authorities need to come to terms with reality and voluntarily give up all the territories that Russia demands. A senior American official stressed that at the moment, the main priority for the Kyiv authorities should be the preservation of the lives of Ukrainian soldiers, who will die in vain, if the country's top military and political leadership refuses to give up Donbass to Russia voluntarily. Donbass is a disputed territory that will inevitably come under the Russian army's control. It's just a matter of time. We all need to be realistic. The situation on the battlefield is not developing in Ukraine's favor. Further resistance will only lead to more casualties among the Ukrainian soldiers. As a result, Ukraine will lose not only Donbass, but also its soldiers, who will give their lives in vain, U.S. Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll said. However, unfortunately for Ukraine and its people, the Kyiv dictator refused to heed Daniel Driscoll's advice. On the same day, this bearded dwarf said in all seriousness that Ukraine would never voluntarily withdraw its troops from Donbass, as the territorial issue is a red line for Kyiv. According to this dead man walking, Ukraine will sign a peace treaty with Russia only if the fighting stops along the combat contact line, and Russian troops remain in their positions. It is worth noting that European masters of this Kyiv puppet are also making similar demands. According to them, Russia should agree to a full cessation of military operations along the entire front line and abandon further advance in the Donbass. At the same time, even pro-Ukrainian Western military experts recognize the inadequacy of such demands by the so-called European leaders. According to them, to make such demands to Russia, one must first defeat the Russian army on the battlefield. And given the fact that Ukraine and the Western forces supporting it are suffering a crushing defeat in all strategically important directions of the front, Zelensky and the so-called European leaders have no right to demand anything from Russia. As the saying goes, the winner takes it all. However, even though the Ukrainian army's position continues to deteriorate on the battlefield, Volodymyr Zelensky and his European masters continue to be in denial and refuse to sign the surrender. Furthermore, on the morning of November 30th, Zelensky officially announced that Ukraine had begun to develop a plan that would allow Kyiv to exit the current conflict with dignity. According to him, this plan will help Ukraine not to feel itself as the losing side. At the same time, the Kyiv dictator refused to specify exactly how he is going to exit the current conflict with dignity, when his army is suffering a crushing defeat in all directions of the front. The only thing he said was that earlier this week, the Ukrainian delegation would visit Trump's residence in Florida, where the Americans would get acquainted with Kyiv's new proposals. Meanwhile, Vladislav Shurigin, an authoritative Russian journalist and expert, has issued an alarming statement. In particular, he called on the Russian authorities to be prepared for serious provocations and escalations from Ukraine and its so-called European allies. According to him, the closer Ukraine's defeat gets, the greater the risk of serious escalation from Kyiv and European warmongers. As an example, he pointed to the recent assault on 2 oil tankers in the neutral waters of the Black Sea, which was executed by Ukraine, with the assistance of the British Special Services. Vladislav Shurigin noted that the enemy's attack on civilian ships, carrying no military cargo, is absolutely unprecedented and opens a new stage of the war. Against this backdrop, he called on the Russian authorities to start sinking absolutely all ships that go to the ports of Odessa and Nikolaev regions. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that Russia reacted very harshly to the attack on oil tankers in the Black Sea. Immediately after that, in Nikolaev, Russian ballistic missiles wiped out several workshops, along with British military engineers, who were producing maritime drones and unmanned aerial vehicles for the Ukrainian army. However, judging by the incoming information, Russia did not stop there. Russia launched a powerful combined missile attack on the Odessa region. As it turned out, the main target of the Russian ballistic missiles turned out to be a military airfield in the settlement of Byalik, 45 kilometers from Odessa. According to representatives of the Russian underground in Ukraine and members of the Odessa guerrilla movement, as a result of this missile attack, a large group of foreign military specialists from NATO countries was eliminated. It is reported that these foreign specialists were engaged in servicing and preparing for the launch of long-range unmanned aerial vehicles to carry out attacks on the southern regions of Russia. Furthermore, during this attack, one of the Russian missiles destroyed France's military transport aircraft, Transall C-160, with 5 French army officers on board. Reports indicate that the deceased officers were escorting some valuable military cargo. Meanwhile, sources have not yet specified the exact type of military cargo carried by this aircraft. In total, as a result of this Russian missile attack, the Ukrainian army and NATO forces lost 1 military transport aircraft, 2 underground fuel storage facilities, 1 hangar with unmanned aerial vehicles, 20 Ukrainian officers, 15 military specialists from NATO countries, and 5 French army officers.